But these are basically all words that have like the same sound but a different meaning, so a lot of people get them confused. Some of them I didn't know the differentiation before I started teaching. Yeah, like apparently there's a difference between when you use fewer and less, and I don't know, I figured those were like the same thing, but they're not on the test, so don't do that. The first one we're gonna go over is except with an A versus except with an EXC. So except with an A is a verb. So when you're doing this, you're gonna have some sort of action going on, whether you're like recognizing someone, like you're like accepting them, or you're like receiving something, like you're accepting a gift. And then except with an EXC, that shows like contrast or like exclusion of some sort. So these two sentences, for each of these you're gonna have to write two sentences, so sorry, that's kind of like a lot you're gonna be writing today, but without the sentences it's hard to tell the difference for some of these. So the first one, I accepted her invitation. If you take out accept here, there's like no longer a verb, so that's a decent way to test it. I feel like you guys should be like confident with actually deciding if something's a verb or not. Some of these are more difficult than others for like deciding if it's a verb, but I feel like this one isn't too difficult. The next one, where you're like contrasting some things, no one in my family except for my mom runs. So except for my mom, I'm contrasting my mom with the rest of my family because she's like the only one that's different than us. My mom isn't like accepting anything or like doing anything in this case. I'm just like pointing her out. So this one, there's not like a really like an easy trick. Most of these all like have a trick for you guys, but this one you kind of just have to memorize if it's like a verb or not, or like be able to recognize that. So does anyone have any questions though? No? Okay. So our second one is effect versus effect. Effect with an A is going to be an action verb, and I remember that because like both of those start with the letter A. If you just put like effect as a verb, then like it's not as easy to remember it, but if you can, like you just do that, I guess. And then effect, that is going to be a noun, but the easier way to do that is to just put the words end result in place of effect. So the test for effect and effect are going to be just placing end result in place of like whichever word you see on the test. And if end result makes sense, then you're going to pick that because end result is a noun. So it's just like taking the place of that. And I'll show you guys how to do that in a second. first one, the school's decision affects students. If we try and replace end result, which is the easiest way to test for this, and we try and put that in place, it doesn't make any sense. It'd be the school's decision, end result, students. That obviously doesn't make sense, and then we don't have a verb anymore, so you're not going to want to pick that. You'll want to keep it with an egg because it's a verb. Whereas in the next one, if you test end result, it goes from the effect of her time outside was a tan to the end result of her time outside was a tan, and that makes sense, so we can do that. Also, if you're trying to test if it's like a noun or a verb, if it has the in front of it, if it has an article like a, in, or the, it's probably going to be a noun afterwards. I can't think of a case where it would be like a verb afterwards. So that's also a good giveaway if you're like trying to figure it out and for some reason like putting end result doesn't work. Yeah, does anyone have any questions on that? No? Okay. Also, another easy way to remember that effect and end result both start in E, so I like to point that out. Most of these things, like the ways to remember them, are just going to be like different like alphabet things, like connecting them, because there's really no other easy way to remember them. Okay, our third one, this is the rule that I had no idea existed. It's fewer versus less. Anyone want to take a guess as to what the difference is?
Fewer has to do with number, and less has to do with, I want to say amount, but I feel like amount also has to do with numbers.
You're really close. So fewer is a specific number, and less is just like a general amount. So yeah, basically what he said. So fewer, whatever you're describing has to be countable. And then with less, it's just going to be something you can't count. So there are some things that theoretically you could count, but like in reality you really can't. Like some people ask really weird questions, like if I'm like describing sand, which do I use? It's not plausible to actually count the amount of grains of sand, so you're going to use less. Same with like grass, trees, that type of thing. Even though you could theoretically count everything, you wouldn't. And if you're talking about like a specific small area of something, like a specific amount of trees in a park, that's different. But if you're talking about like the total amount of trees on the earth, use less. So our first sentence, fewer people voted for him. We can use fewer here because we're describing the amount of votes, we're counting the votes. Whereas in the next one, we can use less in the sentence, people like him less than her, because we're describing how much someone likes something. And in that case, even though we could try and like assign a numerical value to how much we like something, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's not going to be the same for everyone, and you can't really like actually count it. So we're going to use less. Less, most of the time, you'll be using with like general ideas, not like concrete objects. So does anyone have any questions about that? No? Okay. Our next one is going to be than versus then. Most people know this one already, but they don't think about it, so they might get it wrong. Than is going to be a comparison. And then is going to be like a time frame. order that things are being done. Okay, so our first sentence, she likes Qdoba more than Chipotle. I don't know whether or not all of you agree with this. We've gotten into pretty heated debates in previous years. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Like, when you have 20 people in a room and there are people who disagree with you, they are not afraid to speak up. So, we're comparing in this sentence how much this person likes Qdoba versus Chipotle. We're not talking about a time or anything. So yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. And then this one, she's baking the cookies and then frosting them. Since we're talking about the order that these things are occurring in, we're going to use then with an E. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay.
Taco Bell's the best.
I'm gonna say that's wrong, but
I don't know, I think he's onto something.
Yeah, I've never had Taco Bell.
No, I just think they're all not bad.
yeah, I've had Chipotle a lot more since I went to college because most of my friends are from places that don't have Qdoba for some reason, which I thought Qdoba was national, but guess not. So yeah, I like both, I guess now, but at the time I liked Qdoba more. Taco Bell, I don't think I've ever actually eaten Taco Bell before.
Can't knock it before you try it.
Crap.
Yeah,
I feel like
I guess.
That's
fast
surprising.
Mexican food is just not the move.
Not even like
Taco Bell's
Mexican
good.
food.
It is.
Okay, so I guess my mom really likes. No, she doesn't. She likes Taco John's instead. I'm just kidding. Never mind. So now we have the difference between the twos. We have TO, TOO, and TWO. So TO is just a preposition. Or an infinite, like, you can also use it with infinitives too. If you guys are in Spanish, you know what like an infinitive is. It's just to plus a verb that's not conjugated. I'll put that too. And then the next kind, TOO, is talking about like an amount of something, or it means also. And then TWO, I hope everyone knows that, just like the number 2. So I'm not gonna do a sentence for that one unless someone asks for it, but you know, if you want, I will do it. So, the first sentence we're gonna do is, I'm gonna write it first actually. I'm gonna do another sentence for this so you guys can see what an infinitive is if you're not familiar with it. Okay. So there's not as many sentences as I thought there was going to be. TO as a preposition is normally going to be describing location. So if you're not super familiar with prepositions, basically anytime you see TO unless it's an infinitive like over here, which I'll explain. It's going to be like part of a prepositional phrase. Yeah, so prepositional phrases are going to start with like a word like this and then end with a noun. You don't really need to know that, just know like the difference between these two, which it's pretty easy once we get to two. I can describe it better. And then an infinitive, if you're not familiar, is like I like to swim. To swim together combined is considered an infinitive, not just like one or the other, but like together. And then TOO, the easiest way to test for all of these is to put the word also in there and see if it works. For this first case, it's not going to work because this is an amount, but it will for the next one. So if we were to test it, it'd be like there's also much salt in the food. Like in the right context it could work, but in general it's not a good sentence. So here we're gonna have to look and like if also doesn't work right away, check and see if it's an like amount of something. So too much salt in the food, that's going to be the amount because you're like describing how much there is in it and you think there's like too much in it. Where the next one, if you test it with also, then it works. Like I want to go also. Anytime you see TOO at the end and you can replace it with also, make sure that you put a comma in front of it. That's just the rule that goes with that, so just something to be aware of. Does anyone have any questions on these? No?
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
On the last sentence, it says I want to go to. Why is there a comma like after go? Like, could you explain that?
Yeah, so anytime you see that, that's how you'll want to punctuate it, but you do that because you naturally pause when you do that at the end, like, I want to go to. And also, I think it's just to, like, set it off and show that it's, like, its own thing. It's kind of an interjection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Our sixth one, it's versus its. I kind of went over this last time a little bit. Okay, so anytime you see its without an apostrophe, it's going to be indicating possession or ownership. So the easiest way to test for this though is to just replace it with it is and see if it works, because if it does, then automatically just put the apostrophe because like all that signals is that it's like a combination of two words, that it's a contraction. So that's like by far the easiest way to go. That's probably one of the easiest like ones that we're gonna do today. I'll give you a sentence anyways just so you can see how to test that if you're not sure. In the first one, if the movie was better than its book, if we try and put it is in there, it doesn't make sense. It would be like the movie was better than it is book. Where in the next one, it's hot outside, we could say it is hot outside and it makes like total sense, so we'll know that like we can use the apostrophe there. Does anyone have any questions? You'll probably see this one at least once on like your test. This one's really, really common. Okay, we're going super fast through these. The next one, I still forget the difference. It's farther versus further. One has an A, one has a U. So farther with an A is going to be a physical distance between two places or two things. So for these, just imagine that you are like, you would be able to use a map when you're like describing whatever it is in the sentence. The next one, Further is describing like a degree or a level of something. I know that's like a confusing definition, and honestly I don't have a great way to explain that, but as long as you couldn't use like a map to describe whatever you're looking at, then you're gonna use further. That's the easiest way to test for this one. Okay, for the first one, it's farther to the mall than the school from here. We know it's a physical distance because we can look at where the mall is like on a map or where the school is on a map relative to where we are. Whereas in the next one, the interviewer had no further questions. There's really no way to like look at questions on a map, like that just like doesn't make any sense at all. So basically, if it deals with location, it's farther. If it deals with anything other than location, it's going to be further. So, any questions? No? Okay, we're halfway done with these. We are going so fast through this. One time it took me like 2 entire classes to get through this because they asked so many questions on each one, which it was like really excessive, but. Okay, the next one, this, I don't know, you're not really comparing two things, it's just one of the things is wrong and one of them is right. So, the first one, like could of, is never right. Same thing for like would of. Any of those like could have, would have, should have. If it has the of, it's wrong. You will see this on the test because people use it a lot. Like when we're texting each other or just like writing simple things down because it sounds just like the contraction of like could have. It's just like written differently. So either options where you put like apostrophe VE after could or you put the actual word have, either of those are right. If you see this, like automatically just, it's wrong. Just like ignore it as a choice. Any questions? Okay. The next one is the difference between the theirs. So there's like THEIR, THERE, and THEY''RE. These ones, they're not that hard, but people get them mixed up all the time just because a lot of times they're not actually told like the right way. So there is going to be possession, like THEIR. That's going to be possession or ownership. A group of people are going to be owning something. THERE, that is going to be primarily location. And then the like THEY''RE there, that's just they are. "100% of the time I recommend that as soon as you see a question that involves like multiple of the theirs, automatically try and split it up in between they are, because if it works, then automatically just use this one. You can move on. If it's not, then you might have to like decide if it's like ownership or something like that. But by far the easiest way is to just like put that in place of the there that's in there. Okay, so our first sentence, their car is new. We're describing someone else's car that they have just recently bought, so they're going to be the owner of that. If we try and put they are in place of that, they are car is new. That doesn't really make sense. It sounds like, I don't know, like their car or something, which just really wouldn't make sense in any context. If you're looking at THERE as a location, the car is over there. Or there's also their THERE can be used in the case of like there is no chance of snow, where you have like there is, there are, there was. That's a really common setup too. So if you see like there plus like a short verb right away, it'll probably be this one. I'm not going to guarantee that because of this down here, but yeah, that's just another case where you might see that. There's not a great way of describing that, like very simply. If we try and put they are in there, the car is over they are, or they are is no chance of snow, that neither of those make sense. So we're not going to want to use it there. But in the last one, they're getting a new car. If we split that up and we say they are getting a new car, makes perfect sense, so we know that we can use it there. Any questions on these? Nope. Okay. Number 10 is that versus which. This one, it's really up to you which you want to use. There's just one subtle difference. Okay, so that you are not going to have any commas with. If you use that, that information is going to be more important and it's deemed like essential, where if you use which, that is automatically going to be deemed non-essential information, whatever comes after that in that like comma hug that you have going on. Yeah, that's really the only difference. The ACT won't ask you to choose between the two of these. They'll just like give you a question where maybe they'll have that with no commas versus that like with commas, and then have like which without commas or like no change, something like that. Just make sure that you know that if you're using that, you need or you don't need commas, and if you use which that you do, that's all. You won't be tested on like picking between the two, because it's like your opinion on if it's important or not. The next sentence is basically the exact same thing except which. So if you don't want to write out that whole same thing again, that's fine. You can just put like comma, which leads to their house. I'm going to write the whole thing just like for clarity, but you don't have to write it all again. else though with which, they might test you on if like there's a comma here, making sure that there's another comma here if it's kind of like interjecting. If it's at the very end of your sentence, then you would only have one comma because what comes after it would be a period. But just make sure that you have like 2 punctuation marks around whatever like clause this is. Most of the time the ACT it'll be 2 commas though. So the difference between these two, even though you don't need to know them for the ACT, I'll explain them anyways. So I feel like writing an essay or something, you have like a better idea of when or not to use them. So the road that leads to their house is under construction. In this case, the road, like the fact that the road leads to the house is important, where in the next one, the road which leads to their house is under construction. In this case, it's more important that the road is under construction as opposed to like where it's headed or like who lives at the end of it. That's really the only difference. So this part is just non-essential, that part it is. Does anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay, our 11th one is going to be that and which versus who. You're going to use that and which when you have some sort of like inanimate object, it's not alive. And you're going to use who when you have a living thing. The line gets kind of gray when you're doing like living things because normally we mean a person, but also like domesticated house pets count as like using who. You know what, actually I'm going to change this, sorry, from living thing because then you might think you can use plants or something, which you can't. To person or pet, just because that's more clear. Anytime you use who, it needs to be a person or a pet or like something that has some sort of a name. Whereas I'll use the same sentence as the last one. It's like the road that leads to their house is under construction. In that case, the that we're using is describing the road, which obviously the road isn't a lie. You don't have to write that sentence out again. If you want to just draw an arrow or something, that's what I would do. So the first one, like I said earlier, of a road that leads to their house under construction, that is describing the road, which isn't alive. Where in the next one, my friend who loves to bake wants to open a bakery. We're going to be able to use who because it's describing the friend, and the friend is obviously like a living person. So yeah, you could also mention like a cat or something. Obviously the cat wouldn't be like baking in that case, but you could use who with that. So I don't have any questions over that? No? Okay. The next thing we're going to do is who versus whom. Normally, I get a lot of questions on this one asking me about the very next one, so that's why it's in the order it is, if you were wondering. So who is going to be the subject, or like, yeah, it's like talking about the subject, whereas whom is going to be acting as an object. I recommend 100% of the time when you are testing these, if you're trying to like figure this out, it's way easier to just replace who with he, or like they or something, and whom with him or them. way easier. Also, who ends with like a vowel, so does he, and whom ends with an M, so does him and them. That's how I remember it. But it's super easy if you just want to like put these words in there and replace that, because otherwise determining if it's a subject or an object can be kind of confusing. Also, this first example is going to be like more complicated than what you're going to see in the actual ACT, most likely. So, just one second. Normally on the ACT you will not see who or whom in the form of a question. That would be extremely rare. Do not expect that, but I do want to teach you how to do it anyways in case they decide to throw that in there. So with these, it's not like extremely clear if it's a subject or not, because both of these are the first word of the sentence, where we normally would see like a subject in a regular sentence. So the way that you want to do this is to just answer your own question in like the same kind of format. So like, who is the favorite to win? He is the favorite to win. And then, whom do you want to win? I want him to win. So if you see it in a question, try and flip it around and make it just like a straight up statement where it's not asking any sort of questions. Normally though, you will see it as just a statement, so those questions are going to be way easier. But if you can do these in the form of a question, you're going to be fine. In one of the last examples that I gave you, I think like the who, my friend who loves to bake wants to open a bakery. In that one, if you take out like the my friend part, and you just look at who loves to bake, you're just going to look at like the clause that like has to do with the who part, just like you would with that or which, and just say that part and replace it with he or him. So in that one, if you look above in your notes, if you replaced it, it would be like my friend who loves to bake, and then you would like shorten that to like he loves to bake. You would take out the my friend part because that's confusing. But since he loves to bake makes sense, that's why it's who in the example above this for number 11. Does anyone have questions? No? Okay. Number 12, or that is number 12, sorry. Number 13 is I versus me. It's almost the exact same thing as who versus whom. So I is going to be like who, it's going to be your subject. And me is going to be like whom, it's going to be your object. For this one, there's not like an easy thing to replace either of them with necessarily. At least in the examples that I'm going to give you, you could you could put like he instead of I, or him instead of me, but that's not going to work in every single case. There's other ways that I'll show you to figure that out without having to do that. Okay, so this first one, I'm just going to address that before we move on. It was I who answered the phone. This is a weird sentence. I would say it was me who answered the phone, but honestly, I would never say like it was me who answered the phone. I would just say I answered the phone. If you have a situation like this where it was like it was blank, just take out the it was, and then just like make it into its sentence like without that part, because it's like unnecessary. You would also just like ignore the who then too, and change it to I answered the phone. And also you can't just like go on if I's at the beginning of the sentence, or like if whatever it is at the end, it's automatically me, because even though we think that's how it should be, it's not. I'm gonna give you an example where it's not. So technically, she is taller than I is like an actual sentence, and you should not say she's taller than me. Guarantee if I'm talking, I'm gonna say she's taller than me, but on the ACT, don't do that. That's because this is actually called an elliptical phrase. Here, here in senior English or taking like college lit or something, you might see this, but I would kind of doubt it. So this, anytime you see like than, I, whatever, or than he, whatever, just add in like the am at the end. So if you can put a verb after like she's taller than I am, you have your subject here and your verb here. If you can't put like am or is or something afterwards, then you'd want to use me. But if you can, if I is at the end and you can put a verb after it, it's correct. If you have I at the end and you can't put a verb after it, then it's wrong. Wouldn't expect to see this on the ACT, but wouldn't necessarily rule it out either. This one, you could replace it with him. That's probably what I would do with me, just because it's easier. Yeah, you can't really do that with I. Most of the time on the ACT though, they're gonna give you pretty simple like ones. They're probably not gonna try and trick you too much with these. Like, I'd say there's probably like a 90% chance you aren't gonna see like this example or this one, and it's probably just gonna be like I versus me, but like simple. Like instead of like my mom asked me to do the laundry, they might give you a question where it's like my mom asked I to do the laundry. So that's pretty obvious just because that one's like actually correct the way we speak. I wouldn't worry too much on these, but does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Then our last one, okay, we're gonna have a decent amount of time because we got through these really fast. The last one though, this is the most confusing. It's lay versus lie. I'm gonna be honest, I have to use my notes for this one to like explain it because I consistently forget. Lay is something you do to something else. There's going to be an object receiving your action. And lie is going to be something that you are doing yourself, not like lying, like telling a lie, but like the physical action of like lying down. So what makes these so confusing, even after you learn this, is that there's a verb chart that I'm going to give you once I do these sentences really quick that just really makes it harder to like get it. Because the conjugations overlap a lot for this, so you need to make sure that when you're reading you know what tense the rest of the passage is written in, because otherwise it can throw you off. Which, I hate these questions, I'm going to be honest. Yeah, just make sure you know it though. It's not too bad in these examples. when it's in like the infinitive form, but when it's like conjugated, it's worse. Okay, so the first one, she made sure to lay down the heavy books. It's going to be lay here because the thing that's being laid down is the books. She's not personally laying down. Whereas on the next one, I lie down for a nap each day after school. That's something that like I'm doing to my own body, like the action of like resting. It's not too awfully confusing. Just like make sure that you know this part, and then that you can memorize the like verb chart that I'm going to give you in a second. If you can memorize that lay deals with objects and lie has to do with yourself, and in the chart you're going to be totally fine. You just might have to like think about it to get it right. Okay, so this, when you're dealing with objects, like things you're going to be doing to something else, in the present tense, it's a lay. In the past tense, it's laid. In the past participle, it is had laid. So she made sure to lay the books down. She laid the books down after school, or she had laid the books down when she got home. Where if you're talking about yourself in the present tense, like I lie down for a nap after school, or like in preschool each day I would lay down for a nap or something like that. And then in the past participle, like she had laid down for a nap when her dad came home or something like that. It's just really confusing because of these two. So that's why you have to make sure you know what tense everything else is in. And also like the actual order of all of this, because if you know like that, it just makes it way easier than if you don't. If you don't, you're probably gonna get it wrong, honestly. Like, that's one thing I did not want to memorize. Like I refused to memorize this for my first one, and I got them wrong. Like, of course, because I didn't do it. There was a question about it, and I had no idea, so I had to guess. So don't do that, because that's not very helpful. These are like more difficult. That's just make sure you like put some time into it, and then you'll be fine. That's the last thing we have. We're done like 8 minutes early. But that's everything. Does anyone have any questions at all? No? Okay.